Should buying sex be illegal? We can reveal an important group of British politicians think so, but other countries are relaxing the rules. We report from Europe's biggest brothel.
Do you enjoy it as a job?
When I have a nice man, of course.
And when you don't?
Then I'm also not so friendly.
Newsnight has seen the final reports from a group of MPs that will say buying sex should be against the law in England and Wales. That would follow Sweden, Norway and soon France, where the clients of prostitutes are considered criminals. But other European countries are going in the opposite direction, legalising the trade. In a moment, we'll ask which route we should take. But first, Germany has the most liberal laws, and it's been very good for a certain kind of business. Jim Reid has been allowed to film inside Europe's biggest brothel. And a warning, there are images of nudity from the very start of his report.
This is the result of an experiment, one its critics say has gone badly wrong. In 2002, Germany legalised the buying and selling of sex. The €16 billion industry is now dominated by so-called mega brothels like this. Paradise in Stuttgart is the largest of its kind. At a cost of £5 million, it's home to 80 women and hundreds of male customers every night.
The sex trade here is so out in the open, it can feel a bit uncomfortable, even shocking at first. But large brothels like this have now spread across cities in this country. The decision to relax prostitution laws in 2002 was meant to make life safer for sex workers. Critics say it's just made Germany into the bordello of Europe.
Most of the people here didn't want to appear on camera, but the brothel said 22-year-old Hannah would speak to us. She's been working in the sex industry for 2 years, sleeping with 5 or 6 men a night.
I started 18 and finished 3 in the morning. Yeah, it's okay. And, you know, I can say no when I don't like, and I can search what I like and what not. I don't must do anything what the men like, I do what I want.
So how much could you earn, or how much could a girl in general earn in one night?
Totally depend. So you can make from 100 to 1,000 euro. Depend on this, yeah.
1,000 euros in a night?
When you have luck, yeah. It can be, but not often.
If prostitution was banned in Germany, if these places didn't exist, would you still work as a prostitute?
No. Then it's not safe. Then, yeah.
So you wouldn't work at all in that way?
No. It's really too dangerous. Too many crazy people.
Do you enjoy it as a job?
When I have a nice man, of course.
And when you don't?
Then I'm also not so friendly. This is a good thing. You don't must every time friendly.
These are working rooms. You can look inside here. So very nice rooms.
By treating it as a job like any other, the idea was to prize women away from the pimps that run the trade. Sex workers can now pay into social security and demand health insurance. But partly as a result of the new law, the number of prostitutes in Germany is thought to have doubled to 400,000. Most of the women here are from Eastern Europe, countries like Romania and Bulgaria. Critics say the policy has led to a rise in trafficking as girls are shipped in to meet demand.
It's because you run this as a business.
The people who own and run large brothel chains strongly deny that's the case.
Das ist von der Politik und von den Feministinnen, die gegen Prostitution sind, ist das eine Argumentation, die aber nicht stimmt. Zwangsprostitution findet in Etablissements statt, die man entweder gar nicht kennt oder in Terminwohnungen, die man auch nicht kennt. Und das ist ein Riesenproblem, aber ein Problem der Polizei. So wie wir arbeiten, können eigentlich fast zu 99% sagen, bei uns gibt es keine Zwangsprostitution.
Does it also increase prostitution in general in Germany, having places like this?
Nein. Prostitution gab es in Deutschland schon immer und sie ist durch solche Läden einfach regulierter aber nicht vermehrter. Die Prostitution hat sich vermehrt durch die Eröffnung des Ostblocks und durch die EU.
Germany now has the most liberal prostitution laws in Europe. It's one of a handful of countries, alongside the Netherlands, to have legalised the profession. In the UK, the buying and selling of sex is technically legal, but brothels, curb crawling and solicitation are all against the law. At the other end of the spectrum, Sweden, Norway and Iceland. There, selling sex is legal. Instead, it's the man paying for it who is punished with a heavy fine or prison. The same Swedish model is now being seriously considered in Northern Ireland and 6 other countries, most notably France, where legislation is going through Parliament.
When the new law comes into force, it'll mean anyone buying sex over there in France could get a £1,500 fine, whereas a few hundred metres over there in the German city of Saarbrücken, prostitution will be legal. Both countries are going in completely different directions when it comes to tackling exploitation and the sex trade.
And for some, that is a clear business opportunity. On the outskirts of the city, workers are busy on Saarbrücken's new Paradise brothel, the 6th the chain has built across Germany and Austria. From next month, 80 women a night will work in the 30 or so private rooms here.
Es ist für uns praktisch ein Lottogewinn, dass wir noch mehr französische Kunden kriegen, und deswegen ist diese Lage natürlich absolut perfekt.
Critics will say what they're trying to do in France is protect women there, and what you're doing is quite a cynical way to exploit a change in the law.
Das, was wir machen, ist im Prinzip den Frauen eine Plattform zur Verfügung zu stellen, wo sie sicher arbeiten können, wo sie unter hygienischen Umständen richtig arbeiten können. Nur auf der Straße ist die Frau im Prinzip nicht geschützt.
But if the idea behind legalisation was to drag the industry into the light, then in Saarbrücken at least that hasn't happened. There are a number of regulated brothels here, but on a cold Friday night there are still young girls working the streets. The city's left-wing mayor supported the decision to relax prostitution laws. Now she's firmly changed her mind.
Und die Tendenzen gerade in den Großbordellen finde ich auch nicht entsprechend der Würde der Frauen. Und es gibt natürlich auch sehr viele Begleiterscheinungen, welche Menschen kommen in die Stadt, wie ist das gesamte Umfeld. Und deshalb sehen wir das Ganze sehr kritisch. Aber es wird jetzt einfach zu viel und deshalb habe ich auch gesagt, stopp, es müssen gewisse Maßnahmen her, das Gesetz muss verändert werden. Meine Forderung wäre eigentlich, dass man sich europaweit auf eine Regelung einlässt, weil dann gelten in allen Ländern die gleichen Regeln und dann wird es keinen sogenannten Sextourismus von einem in das andere Land geben.
But for the moment, the EU appears split down the middle on the sex trade. Next month, a parliamentary inquiry in the UK will recommend we reject legalisation and officially criminalise the buying of sex for the first time. Whichever direction Europe follows, whether it's the liberal German or strict Swedish approach, that could decide the way thousands of women and men are treated for decades to come.
Well, joining me now are Laura Lee, a sex worker and spokesperson for the International Union of Sex Workers, Dr. Belinda Brooks-Gordon, author of The Price of Sex, Dorcas Erskine, who works with trafficked women, and Mary Honeyball, a Labour MEP who campaigns in Brussels on just this issue. Welcome to you all. Laura Lee, firstly to you, just to be completely clear about this, men pay you for sex. That's been your career for many years.
Yes, they do. Men indeed pay me for sex. I've been a sex worker now for just under 20 years. I love my job. I truly do, and I don't believe I'm quite different from the vast majority in saying that. The current proposals that are on the table really concern me because it seems to me that it will create a police state, because when consenting adults are having sex, that is none of the state's business.
But when you see the rules relaxed so far that there's that kind of warehousing of sex, like in that mega brothel, what do you make of that? Would you be happy to work somewhere like that?
Personally speaking, would I be happy to work in a mega brothel? Yes, I would. I'm not saying the sex industry is for everybody necessarily. I'm saying that it has been my choice and I have loved what I do, and it's the same can be said of many of my colleagues. You know, my big concern with this current push that's going on is that the voices of sex workers have not been heard. We have not been consulted.
Well, Belinda Brooks-Gordon, you also believe the rules should be relaxed to such an extent that sex businesses should even pay tax, be formalised like that.
That's the circumstance in Austria and Switzerland, and you never hear of problems of those states. What is interesting is that areas where it is very prohibited, Thailand, for example, and Jamaica, it's actually more visible.
So we should treat it just like any other business, like selling bread and milk down the shops?
Not like any other business. So, for example, the situation in Germany is that people can't be made to go into that business, in the labour exchange, for example, and the client can't enforce the contract, but the sex worker can if he doesn't pay.
Well, Mary Honeyball, nice bit of cash for the Treasury then.
Well, actually, it doesn't work quite like that in Germany. There are about 400,000 women who work in prostitution across Germany. They are supposed to have access to health care and be able to claim benefits and all those sorts of things that Belinda talked about. In fact, they don't. At the last count, only 44 out of those 400,000 had actually done that. So it isn't nice money for the Treasury. And you have to ask why those women working in prostitution don't actually come forward and take advantage of what the state claims that they will give them.
But many of them, Dorcas Erskine, like Laura here, say they've made a choice to do this for a living. Do you have a problem with the choice that they make, a problem with the choice that Laura's made?
Oh no, with respect to Laura, she seems like a very confident woman who's happy with the choice that she's made. But Laura doesn't represent the vast majority of women in prostitution. Please do not interrupt me.
We'll come back to you in a second.
I believe that laws are made not to protect the minority who are fine, but the majority who are not. And the majority who are not, even people who do not agree with our stance on prostitution. So I quote research from someone who's very virulent about our stance on prostitution that they did for the Home Office. And they noted that most of the women that they interviewed had entered prostitution at the age of 13 years old, that 78% of them were in the care system, and that a lot of them also came from migrant backgrounds. Now, those are people who are vulnerable, and I don't believe that making a choice of very limited economic choices is the best that we can offer women in those vulnerable states. I believe that as soon as Eton and Cheltenham's Ladies College put it on their curriculum that prostitution is something that is available for everyone to do of any social class, race and economic background, then okay, let's talk about choice, but we're not there yet.
Okay.
Are you saying that middle-class sex work doesn't exist?
Oh, no, I'm not. I'm not, but I'm just saying that the majority of women who work in it are women who are from these socio-economic backgrounds, and it's not just us who are saying.
Says.
But that's not what the evidence actually does say. That's not what the and we can ping-pong back and forth about this research and that research, but the wider issue
research is important.
Why should sex be?
Well, let's then hear from Laura here. Why is it for you to tell her what she can do for a living?
I'm not telling Laura what she should do for a living, which is why I respect the Swedish model, which Mary's putting forward. I really do not believe, and it really annoys me that the state criminalizes women in prostitution, especially when they come from this background.
Well,
I believe we need to look at criminalizing the buyer.
Was the Swedish model where the client becomes the criminal, but Laura?
I'm not speaking from research, I'm not speaking from any papers, I'm speaking from 20 years of on-the-ground absolute experience in the sex industry. And as to your not representative argument, I've worked in 5-star penthouse apartments right down to what could reasonably be described as a chicken coop and everything in between. And I have met some very, very desperate women in those circumstances. But to criminalise the buyer of the sex act is not the way forward. You need to hit the traffickers.
I've worked with 1,140 women in our organisation who have been trafficked. Your
isn't
experience cannot
Mary
be
Honeyball,
the only
isn't it,
voice
however, better, whether you like the idea of prostitution or not, whether you want to accept it or not, and many people do not, understandably, isn't it better, however, to have women inside a place of business, where they are safe, where they're inside, they're not having the trade pushed to dark corners in unsafe parts of our cities?
I'd like to challenge this dark corners idea, because if the buyer is criminalised, surely the woman who is not the criminal can then come forward. And on the trafficking issue, there is evidence, good evidence from Sweden, actually gathered by the Swedish police, that trafficking has actually halved in Sweden since the law was introduced there in 1999, which is a significant decrease, which actually does demonstrate, I think, that the Swedish model, where the buyer is criminalised, actually does reduce trafficking. And I think also, interestingly, it's affected attitudes towards prostitution and buying sex as well.
Belinda, what does it say about us, though, as a society, if, as you suggest, we relax the rules, we tolerate what goes on, we say it's normal?
Think about sex is normal. Are you saying there is something wrong with having sex? Something wrong with
sex,
earning?
paying for sex would not be considered normal by many people.
What's the philosophical difference between consenting adults behind closed doors, having transactional sex, paying for intimacy? It's not always sex. Sometimes it's companionship, foot fetishism, all sorts of other things, and swinging, dogging, all sorts of other things that consenting adults do.
Because
we may not like them.
12 times more women in prostitution
Dorcas, let her
in
finish and then I'll bring you back in.
Murdered.
What is
it doesn't seem like they're exactly the safest
Let me take issue with some of Poppy Project have a vested interest.
Rather than having a row over the statistics, I'd like you to finish your point. What does it say about us? We used to think all sorts of things were acceptable. We used to think sending children up chimneys was acceptable, slavery is acceptable. Why should we now continue forever in perpetuity to think it's acceptable?
Because it's only sex and it's only earning money. And for some of those women, it is a way... So, for example, the average sex worker will earn over $50,000 a year. 85% of sex workers, according to the academic peer-reviewed...
Well, there's a lot of disputes over the numbers, but on that point, Dorcas, on that point, it's only sex, it's only money. What is so wrong with that?
I don't know. Well, yeah, I guess the formulation of that argument is to make it seem like we're conservative, we're quite puritanical. But I don't see what's conservative about saying that sex should be free.
But hold on,
I haven't finished. And I also don't see what's conservative about, like, believing that we want a society, as we have they're producing in Sweden, where men can feel like they don't have to purchase sex on the backs of those who are vulnerable. That's such a radical, conservative idea.
If this were to go forward, what difference would it make to you as a sex worker if your clients became criminal?
It would make a huge difference. Let's bear in mind, I work with a lot of disabled clients. I work with a lot of guys who are in dire, dire circumstances. Not that I'm saying that entitles them to sex, but I'm just inviting the viewer to, you know, take a broader view of it. Excuse me, I didn't talk
let her finish her point. Please let her finish her point.
I am sorry.
Section 39 of this proposal effectively says that the police can come and kick my door in to investigate the fact that I'm having consensual sex behind closed doors. That's wrong.
OK, Mary, very briefly, will there be legislation on this or not? Very briefly.
In the European Parliament, not yet, but the point is that you legislate for the majority, and the majority of women who work in prostitution have either been trafficked or have been brought up.
OK, I'm afraid we must leave it there. There's clearly huge dispute over the numbers, but very strong views on all sides. And we must leave it there, but thank you all very much indeed for coming in. Thank you.